Hey YouTubers, I just want to welcome everybody to another episode of Suburbia's Dirty Little Secret. Today with us we have Alan Knoll, and you all know Jenna Bulis. I'm going to kick it over to Jenna before we get started for any updates.
Hey guys, sorry it's taken so long before we've gotten another video out, but I plan on releasing these at least once a month. So if you're interested in being featured on this, please send an email through the YouTube link or contact us through Facebook, Instagram, any of our social media pages. Also, we're working on some legislative stuff headed with a social media campaign we're working on, Breaking Code Silence. So head over to our legislative group, program legislative group, and I'll link it in the description, or WASP Fighters, our activism group. And you can get more details on how you can participate.
Awesome, thanks Jenna. So today with us we have Alan Knoll. Alan Knoll, you live currently in Forks, Washington?
Yeah, thereabouts. Yeah.
Thereabouts, somewhere over there. So any Twilight fans out there, I think that's where Forks actually takes place, right? We're going to go through some questions just about his time and experience. It looks like you were with us, you were in Bethel Boys Academy.
Yes. From
1997 to 1999. What's really crazy, just looking at my notes here and getting to know Alan a little bit earlier, is he went in at 10 years old. I'm going to dive a little bit into that experience because we don't really get a lot of guests on this program that went in at such an early age. Typically they're 15, 16, 17 years old, not so young. And then he left Bethel and went to Agape boarding school from 1999 to 2001. Before I kind of kick it over to Alan and ask some questions, anything that you have going on or that you want to
sure
as an update?
So yeah, we'll get into the experience at Bethel and Agape. Some of the things that we're working on is legislative change, awareness. We're really trying to make a public outcry. Is one of the reasons I'm here doing this with you guys, working with the media. We really feel strongly that our youth is our future, and protecting them from abuse and trauma at a young age really allows them to succeed in the future. And so it's been a big part of my life and some of the advocacy. My team and I we're working on a film. We're trying to make a high quality, highly entertaining documentary. We've teamed up with Session 7's media, and they've created a short, and we're working that process on getting that things going. I've written Surviving Bethel. It's my story from a 10 to 13-year-old perspective while I was at Bethel. And it's pretty raw and tells the story. If you got more questions after the video, go ahead and check out the book. It's available on Amazon and Kindle as well. It's paperback or Kindle. So yeah, those are the things I'm working on. Bethel was an extremely abusive school. It wasn't so much the first few months that I was there, but after about 2 months there was a transition. William Knott showed up, and we went through tremendous abuse. I mean, drowning and resuscitation, pimples being sicked on us, frequent beatings, or cadet on cadet, or student on student, as the public would call it. Yeah. Fights and abuse. They would encourage us to fight each other if something broke out. So what ended up me leaving Bethel and finding my way to Agape boarding school, not me finding, but being sent to Agape, yeah, was I had enough. A particular incident happened where I was punched in the eye, my eye had swelled up, and I took a really good beating. And I just decided that this is going to happen forever, as long as I'm here. And I chose to fight them and rebel to the point where I wasn't going to go to church. I wasn't going to participate in the things, and they could beat me, they could kill me, it didn't matter. I needed to protect myself, and I felt like the only way was to rebel until they couldn't fight me anymore and had to give up. Yeah. And that's how I was able to finally leave Bethel.
Well, and really quick, before we jump too far ahead from Bethel to Agape, just curious for the viewers, we've done this with a few of the guests on the show, like what was the night or the day of? Like how did you end up going to Bethel?
Oh, okay, yeah. I misunderstood the question before.
Totally okay, yeah.
So, that's a really hard question for me to answer because the before and like the after of leaving Bethel are really vague in my mind. I just remember like the things that we needed to buy in order for like the toothbrushes and the toothpaste and at that point they didn't have uniforms there, so the clothes and stuff. And I just remember that part of it, but I actually don't remember much. I do remember the day that they dropped me off was probably the most traumatic day of my life.
So you're saying your parents drove you from Seattle to Mississippi?
They flew down
They
there,
flew down,
and then
yeah.
we drove there from the airport, and I remember saying, like, please don't leave me here. I'm 10 years old. I mean, I'm a little guy, and everybody else is bigger. Even the kids. It's a teenage industry.
Yeah.
It wasn't meant for children, or for kids. And so that was the most traumatic. But I don't remember much about getting to Bethel itself. Yeah.
No problem. So when you showed up at Bethel, being a 10-year-old, I'm assuming the average age was much older.
Yeah, the average age was about 15. Most kids were 15 to 17 years old. The closest one to me when I got there was 13. And then as the years went, as about a year went by, there was a couple kids that were 12 and 13 who I kind of read about in the book that were closer to my age.
Gotcha. And then being the younger kid there, was that more to your advantage or maybe a disadvantage?
Definitely a disadvantage because not only dealing with staff and you want to be a kid, it's your instincts. You're a kid, you're going to ask questions, you're annoying. Those are things, and when you're dealing with teenagers that are being punished as a group, and you can just you're a kid that wanders off and does stuff while everybody's punished as a group, it's a really disadvantage to be much younger because you're annoying to the other teenagers. You're always in their business.
Yeah.
You're a tattletale. Those kind of things happen, and so it's definitely a disadvantage to be much younger.
Gotcha. So you were there for maybe 3 years?
About 2.5 years, something like that. Yeah.
Gotcha.
From 10 to 13. Yeah.
Getting to know some of the other schools and the victims that have been in these schools, there were different levels. Was there a level system at this school as well?
No level. So Bethel, when I was there, was not a WASP school. It was a Lester Willock-based school. Very religious, I guess. You'd go to church twice on Sunday, once on Wednesday, and chapel every night, and prayer every night. But no level. Education was not. Education or counseling or therapy was not part of Bethel. It was generally labor.
Yeah, which makes sense, but it's unfortunate because I'm assuming that your parents were marketed this school to be like a reform school. You were rambunctious, getting in trouble, go to church, get a good education. They pay some tuition costs. Maybe explain to the viewers here a little bit more of the reality versus what was marketed.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So Bethel was in Lucedale, Mississippi, in the smallest town that you can possibly think of, a very, very poor town. And what these guys would do that ran Bethel is they would go out to Seattle, New York, Chicago, wealthier areas, and go and market themselves to counselors, groups, these people that would refer them to these organizations. And they championed themselves as, we're going to change your kid around. We're going to teach them discipline. We're going to give them a good education. They'll get out smarter. They'll have an education discipline, and their futures will succeed because of it. Bethel was the exact opposite of that. These parents pay a lot of money. My parents paid, at the time it was less, and it moved its way up to, $2,500 there, and Agape was $4,500. Well, today.
Per month.
Per month,
Yeah.
And so they're taking money from the parents, but then they would put us to work. They would go contract jobs and have our child labor, go do the job, and they would get paid on top of that. So really what we were was workers in kind of like a slave kind of slave kind of situation. But education was always sold to us as not a priority. There was a job to be done. There was no school, and we did do school, but it was self-school. You scored your own stuff. You did. If you needed help, you figured it out. That's really how it came.
With many of these schools too, just knowing some of the victims, they would come out with a high school diploma. But not the case for Bethel.
Absolutely not. So with Bethel, none of it was accredited. In fact, if you were at Bethel's, let's say from 15 to 17, and you got out where you think it's going to be your senior year, and you went to a public school, now you're back. You're back in 10th or 9th grade because none of those, everything that you did is not accredited. And that's a huge push of what, we're trying to do as far as, my team, and I'm sure you guys, is to bring awareness to that. Like, education matters. It's a huge stepping stone for our youth. And, these programs need to at least have accredited education and a requirement to have education.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of parents are pulling out college funds or savings that are intended for education to pay for these places. And then I know that Academy at Ivory Ridge, which was a WASP program, nobody was able to get their diploma or any kind of thing from that. a lot of these programs. It's not just Bethel. It's very common in the industry. So
Yeah, well, you said you were kind of pushing pretty hard against Bethel. Was that typical for the 2.5 years you were there? Did you try to kind of conform to the system first? Maybe share with the viewers a little bit on like what the progression of your life at Bethel was, kind of from day one to the very end.
Yeah, so Bethel, that's why I named the book Surviving Bethel, the book I wrote, and it's because I did conform originally. I was scared to death, and so was everybody else. Absolute, the things that went on, it's hard to fathom, really, that it would happen, but not just to me, to other people. And so most of us were just absolutely in fear. And I say that legitimately. People are actually scared of living and dying. And so most people conformed, not out of discipline or out of reform or through therapy, but through fear. And I was one of them for a good portion of time. One thing about me is I watched Bethel. I watched them get wealthy. I watched how they, would manipulate and misuse us. And, that day where, that beating happened with me, I just had enough. And that was when the non-conformity started at Bethel. I was always pushed back. I always would challenge things to a point, but to where I could maybe get away with it. And if I didn't, I'd deal with the punishment. But the real lack of conformity happened at the end where I just had enough. And it didn't matter. I just needed to go, and I didn't feel safe.
Was it a natural progression to that point, or was there kind of one memory or one pushing point that got you to kind of...
It was, I was always in trouble. Everybody was always in trouble for something. They would find something. It was a means of control for them. But no, it was one incident in particular, well, two, that happened in the span of 2 days. There was some marching going on, and I was a little kid that couldn't keep in step for drills, and so they put me off to the side, and got smart. One of the guys said that I would never leave or something, that I'd be there till I was 18, and I said, oh, I'm gonna leave one day, right? And he said something. I got smart with him, and he punched me in the eye, and my eye swelled completely up, and I was able to get to a phone and call 911. Sheriff came out and just said, well, next time you won't get smart, and left. With obvious, trauma to my face. And then the next time was, they had started a girls' school, and I was passing notes to one of the girls, and they called me down to the house, to the Fountain House, the owner's house, and he came out with like this big old leather strap and just beat me for several minutes, and that was it for me. How the discipline went and the circumstances of just being a kid. It was just absolutely absurd to me, and that was those two incidents is what just drove me to put up a fight with him.
how did they have it set up to graduate the program, or were you not able to?
No, so Bethel was set up as a means. There was no graduation, even if you were the best kid. Mm-hmm. If you were the best model kid, there was no graduation system. There was no levels. Bethel was set up as a means to. Why would they ever want to get rid of it? Because it's their money. So if your parents were coming to get you out, didn't matter how well you conformed or how well you followed the rules, they're telling your parents, he's a behavior problem. He's not conforming. And the kid would say, no, I am. And they beat us all the time. And these kids, or these people that ran Bethel, they taught people out of their children. They're the best salesmen in the world. Yeah. And so when their parents hear, oh, he's not, he's lying to us, and then that's what they do. When you are enrolled at Bethel, they tell you that they prime the parents to say, hey, look, you're going to hear that this happens, that they're clearly lying. These are behavioral kids, and the parents are trained to not believe their kids, to listen to the professionals. And so Bethel was, once you're there, you're there.
So could you talk to your parents? So like at WASP, before we even got there, they would say, oh, your kid's going to try to manipulate and say that we're abusing them. But, that's just a manipulation. Yep. And so when you get there, we can't talk to you. You couldn't, I didn't have a phone call for like 6 months, but you could write letters. And I know I would write the letters. They were monitored, but, you could slip things in there. But they had already been, told that you would say that. Yeah. So what was it like with communication with your parents and that whole?
So communication, the one advantage at Bethel was age, for being the youngest, is I could get away with some things that others couldn't. Because I was little, I was out of sight, out of mind. I would sneak off to the woods and get away with things. I would get to phones frequently. In fact, they trusted me because I was a tattletale, because I was a little kid, right? And so they would have me once a month. People were allowed a 5-minute phone call with their parents, and it was my job and the Fountains always had a connection, so we had our dorm. It was one phone, and they would always listen at the house too. But it was my job to sit there if they weren't on the phone and to listen to them to make sure nothing was told to the parents, and if it was, then I would rat them out. And so I was a little kid. I wouldn't ever do that in the teenagers or anything else, but that's the circumstance. Really monitored, very limited. My parents most of the time didn't take the calls, but I would. The few times like Thanksgiving, I would call and I would tell them like these people are crazy. And they would, apparently, I don't know if it's the truth or not, my parents would call the Fountains and, oh no, he's a behavior, the same routine. So it's a very hard system to get out of because the parents really, I believe that most parents want the best for their kid, especially like older. In my case, I was younger and maybe it might have been different. But, most people care about their children and, it just didn't work out for a lot of people and how the system works to where you're there.
Yeah, no, I hope so.
Yeah.
Right? Now you finally got out, so you rebelled pretty hard back. How did you end up getting out?
So after those beatings, I decided that I had had enough. I felt like my safety, I didn't want to be there anymore. I was tiring of the circumstances, and I write about a lot in my story. I had just given up, and quite frankly, maybe now looking back, I look at it as a rebellion, but really it was just an absolute lack of care. I just didn't care anymore. I didn't care if they killed me. I just didn't care. They had broken my spirit. That last beating was just it, and I'm not going to church. I'm not participating in your fake stuff that you're trying to push on me. No, I'm not going to work crew. You can drag me there, but I'm not doing it. And I went through this for weeks where they would beat me and hold me down and fight me. I quit eating. And I believe the reason Bethel decided to go ahead and tell my parents to remove me from the school was because the other students were watching this happen, and Bethel didn't want a rebellion to happen with everybody. Hey, look what's happening over here. This kid is just fighting, and what happened is they just decided to leave me alone. They fought me for a few weeks, and they just decided to quit fighting me. And I would just stay in the dorms when everybody else would go to work crews, and I wouldn't eat, and I wouldn't go to their churches. And eventually, Bethel called my parents and said, "Hey, you got to come take him out of here because the other students were worried about the risk." And I imagine that's what happened. I've never had a conversation with the Fountains, but looking back, that's clearly what happened.
Yeah. Awesome. So no, that's a lot, right? So when someone finally gives up, man, I can only imagine you're not eating, and you're getting pretty much beaten, almost to death, I'm sure. So how did your parents finally come and get you? It seems like, I think you had just mentioned they made a call to your parents. Then what?
They didn't come get me. They drove me to an airport, and I got on a plane and flew back to Seattle, and I thought it was all done, and
you were excited.
I had won. I'm finally going to go see my mom, my brothers, my family. I'm in this foreign place in Mississippi, and I'm going to be home with my family, and things are going to go back to normal. And I was wrong about that, but I ended up back in Seattle for about a month or so.
So you were in Seattle for about a month.
Mm-hmm.
I think in our conversation earlier, they were threatening to send you to another program.
Yes. So at Bethel, they're like, "Oh, you might think that you're going back home, but you're going to another school called Agape boarding school." And I just thought they were, the psychological games, what they did, and that's kind of what I thought they were doing. Turns out they were right.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Agape.
So Agape, it's in Stockton, Missouri. They started in Washington State, in Othello, Washington. They were ran out of Washington State and went, because of the laws and stuff of how the treatment of children, and went to Stockton, California. And they didn't comply with the laws of California, and they were pushed to Missouri where they could, do their version of what they call discipline on children and be within the law. And so that's Agape's quick history. And Agape was not Bethel. Bethel was a very physically abusive. The things that you would see, the things that you'd witness, were very traumatic. on a day-to-day basis. There was never a day that went by at Bethel that you did not go through something. Whereas Agape was very mental, very much less physical abusive, but very, like, you couldn't have a conversation. If you and I were going to have a conversation, I would have to, the only words I could ever say to you was, let's go to staff. And then I would have to go to, you and I would have to go in front of a staff member and say, hey, can I talk to this guy? And then that staff member would have to monitor the conversation.
This was at Agape.
At Agape,
Okay.
yeah. And so very mentally controlling like that. Agape was a little better education, but a lot of, I mean, same thing with work crews. Discipline was very high. No talking, no social interaction whatsoever, unmonitored.
So you were at Agape boarding school from, looks like 99 to 2001. So you were a little bit older, weren't quite a kid. Was the experience different being like a 10-year-old in one of these schools versus being 13, 14, 15?
Yeah, I mean, after Bethel, I felt like, me personally, a lot of people, Bethel or Agape is a a rough school for a lot of people. But to me, by all means, Agape was abusive. So don't
negate what he's saying.
But when you're going through something so traumatic and you go to something traumatic but less traumatic, you think, okay, this is a step up. And Agape and I, we had our battles as well. But being a little older was easier to fit in. Still younger than everybody. I mean, even when I left at 15, when I was done with the schools completely, I was still 15, still pretty young.
Yeah.
But as I was getting older, I was able to fit in a little bit more with the students. But I was also getting smarter as far as the system went, and kind of learning how to, not stir stuff up a little bit. Whereas a kid, you're just going to be a kid. Yeah.
What was the progression like? Did you come into, what was your, let me rephrase, what was your mindset like when you first got to Agape?
I was not happy. When I got to Agape, they're giving this spiel to my parents about how their program works, and I'm this is all, I've been through this. It's all lies, and I could tell them all that to my parents, but they obviously, don't believe me. They're going to listen to the professionals, right? And so I already knew what was in store. Bethel, but Agape was much less abusive. It was just very strange, more cultish. I believe Bethel was misusing religion. It was, go through the, whereas Agape was almost cultish in their forcefulness, we'd have to, I probably remember more of the Bible than most people have ever read.
Because of Agape.
Yeah, because of Agape. Agape was very religious, very strong, and, you'd be forced to memorize Bible verses, and so Bethel, Agape had a lot of issues, just different kind of abuse. It was more mind games and mind control, and I really, and I was telling you earlier, is after Bethel was so traumatic to me that I don't remember much of before Bethel, and then even at Agape, and I was talking to another survivor who went to both schools. And it's the same thing, though. Neither of us remember too much of Agape because it was so mundane. It was very scheduled. Everything was on, very scheduled, and he did the same things every day. I mean, we'd move rock piles from one side and then move the rock pile back over here, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That you just don't remember much of it.
Yeah.
Did you guys have fitness at either place? Did they use fitness as part of your day schedule or as a form of punishment? Fitness
is never part of it. Well, at Bethel, every morning at 5 a.m., we would get up and run 5 to 10 miles. That was PT, but I mean, in my mind, that's punishment. As a 10-year-old, you're like, no, right? That was the part that wasn't discipline. Or sometimes somebody would do something and turn into 20 or 25 miles. But generally, that was the only fitness part of it, and then the rest was all punitive.
Yeah. So the kind of towards the tail end of Agape, excuse me, it seems like you were there for a couple years. Tell us a little bit about like the progression and what happened. How did you get out
of Agape?
Yeah.
So Agape, at Bethel, I was kind of pushy and a little bit more mouthy sometimes, where because I was young, and at Agape, I was pretty compliant up to a point. Both schools I saw get rich. both, Agape had burned down and they were rebuilding when I got there. But they keep preaching about how they cared about us and as the students. But then I think my mom didn't pay or forgot or something happened, whether she just chose not to pay, I don't know. But for a few months they had not paid. And they were coming to me to call my mom to tell her to pay. But preaching to us that they're not in it for the money.
Yeah.
And that was my kind of thing that started me turning on like a God. I mean, I was already frustrated with not seeing your family, not having birthday parties, not having Christmases or Thanksgivings at home. Those things are really emotionally tolling. So that part of it was, and then not being able to have actual social or any aspect of outside world, like no TV, no newspapers, no music, no nothing. But once the money aspect came of it, I was like, these guys are hypocrites. They don't care about us. They don't care about anything. It's money. It's money for them.
For sure. Well, the end of Agape kind of turned out to be like the end of Bethel for you.
Yes, I fought Agape the exact same way, and mainly it was the money push. I turned on them after that. I turned on them, and then I was getting older, and I was realizing this is BS. I haven't had any childhood. I've been robbed, and here I am watching these people at Agape. Some of the kids have been there six years. From 12 to 18, one guy, and I'm like, no, this is not happening to me. I have been through enough. And then after the money thing, I just said, no, I'm good. It worked for me at Bethel. Let's give it a shot over here. And Agape was less abusive. I knew they weren't going to kill me. Bethel might have, but I knew Agape wasn't, right? And so I was like, if I could do it, and I went through it and went through some abuse and physical beatings. Nothing like Bethel.
Yeah.
Very mainly restraining me when they're trying to drag me. I would fight them, and they would restrain me, that kind of stuff. And finally, they're just like, okay, we can't do this. Same scenario.
Yeah.
And 9/11 happened, so I couldn't fly, and I had to take a Greyhound bus home because all the planes were down.
So same thing. Eventually, you got pulled out of the school.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And then when you got out of Agape, did you go back home?
Yes. Well, no. I didn't go to my mother's. I went to my first stepdad, who I called Dad, house. My mom was in the process of trying to get me to foster care. My dad didn't have custody at the time, and we actually went to the custody out here in Monroe, and to put me in foster care. My dad just, as they're signing, he just said, we can't do this. I'll take him and I'll figure out the financial part of it, and that's what he did. And I was able to go into public school, and that was the end of boarding schools for me.
Gotcha. So were there any other threats about putting you back, or did you kind of know that you were completely done?
No, I knew my dad wouldn't do that. My dad is not biological, but my dad, he has a lot of regrets of the decisions. He wished that he probably could have done that before. And I was a pretty square kind of kid for the first little while. While I was finding my way in society, but no threats. Once my mom was out of the picture, my dad didn't have the financial ability to do that, and nor would he ever put me. He has a lot of regret, and it's important for the viewer. Let me just say this real quick: is I keep calling them boarding schools, and one of the things that I've discovered is boarding schools are like a rich people. A lot of our public thinks that's like a rich people place where these are behavior modification schools that that they use the name boarding school so people think that they're good schools. So don't confuse those with like a boarding school where you're going to go get incredible education and move on and be the next president. That's not the kind of schools. I want to make sure that the public knows that these are youth reform facilities for behavior. Yeah,
for sure.
And they're marketed as behavioral modification programs, wilderness camps, boot camps. But now more recent, and a lot of Christian boarding schools you will see are religious based, but now recently they've been getting into mental health. So it's really important for any parents that are watching this, if you're getting mental health for your troubled teen and they are recommending any kind of residential treatment, you should be looking into this, because when you are taking children that have come from trauma and putting them in more trauma, you are setting them up for a lifetime of failure and a lifetime of mental illness. So it's really important to educate yourself, because the government does not regulate this industry. at all.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Good point. And I know we didn't go into details, and nor will we, but there was obviously a traumatic event before you went in, maybe causing you to maybe act out a little bit, and maybe intervention was important, such as therapy or whatnot for the trauma. But these type of programs definitely don't seem like they work.
No, it was the wrong choice. And what I recommend for parents, I deal with a lot of this lately, and parents reach out to me, is children that are going through something, that are acting out. There's always an underlying. Kids just don't act out. There's something that they're crying for help for. And the most important thing is not abandonment or sending the problem off to get help. Do what you can to keep your kid at home, because that will give them, maybe not short term, is not going to change anything, but later, in 2 or 3 years, or as they become adults, they're going to look back at that, hey, my parents never gave up on me. They went through that struggle. They were at counseling every day with me, or they did this for me. But when you send your kid off who's having problems, it's a sense of, I was too much for my own family, that they sent the problem somewhere else.
I'm broken.
Yeah.
I have to be fixed. They're sending me to get fixed. And that is like the premise of what most mental illness, like that's the underlying behavior that causes it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, which probably causes more and more issues. So when you get out of the program, which I definitely want to dive into, you probably spend a lot of time reflecting back on why did my parents do this?
Oh, absolutely. I have a huge sense of loss, and I'm dealing with it as an adult now. But for really, I left. It's been almost 20 years since I left Agape, and at 15, and what would I talk to people about what they did in their childhood. How they had this cool birthday party or went to sleepovers and had skating rings. And people tell me these stories, and they ask me, "Oh my God, I got nothing for you. I was in a pool where they held me down." And it sounds stupid, but it's this huge sense of what could have things been. I am aware. I'm a pretty smart person, and I kind of wonder what path would my life have gone. Had I not had to deal with these struggles as a young adult, as an early or as a late teen, and the poor decisions that I made because of just not caring. It really gave me a sense of not caring anymore, and to bring yourself to find worth and hope and a path forward was a huge loss for me. I struggled with so many things after getting out, made a lot of poor decisions, and I really, just what could have been.
Yeah, for sure. It probably gets you thinking about a lot, maybe even daydreaming, right?
Yeah.
If you can share with us, what was your post experience like? So you got back at 15, you potentially could have gone into foster care, but it looks like you went back with your dad or your stepdad, right? Tell us a little bit about maybe some of the issues, the opportunities. What was that experience like getting readjusted?
Yeah. I think for me, because Agape shelters you so much, and so did Bethel. There was 5 years where I didn't know who the president was. There was no music, no newspapers, no media, nothing came in or out that wasn't controlled. So the adjustment period was just complete shock. Going into a grocery store was anxiety filled, still is. We were talking about that earlier, but
we won't get into the Walmart story. We'll say,
but those kind of things were very anxiety. The quietness in public school was very different, and it was really hard to adapt socially. I was very socially awkward, whereas before I was really popular and involved, and before I was sent, everybody knew who I was before I went away and came back, and people would be like, "Oh yeah, you're that guy," but I was so quiet and reserved, and it took me a long time to find my voice. Also, later on as a young adult, like I said, finding a reason, or to keep moving, and I've surrounded myself with good people now to where they're my reason, and it's helped me focus on me to be a better person and those kind of things, and have hope and those kind of. But those first, 10 years was a really hard struggle to find a path forward.
Anything else you want to share about Bethel or Agape?
So Agape still operates today. So let me say that Bethel is closed, but there are many organizations like Bethel, maybe not as abusive or more, who knows? Because a lot of these schools operate in the shadows. And the thing which is different a little bit than WASP is these are religious schools. And with religion, there's a separation of state and church and that kind of stuff. And we're trying to, we're not trying to take anybody's religion away. We believe it's a good right to have. But what we're trying to do is protect youth. If that kind of stuff's happening, if the government would have been allowed to come in and just to check on our welfare, things would have been a little bit different. And actually, done something. It was Mississippi, but things might have been a little bit different. And I guess my biggest thing is what I say in every interview is, if you're a parent, and any survivors that watch this, firsthand that the best thing that any parent could do is stay with your child. Keep your child at home if you can. I mean, there's some kids that you can't. There's a safety concern and stuff. But go visit them anytime. Make sure it's a good school. Do your research. If they won't let you see your kid when you want to see your kid, then that's not the school that you should take your kid to. And because if you're going to do that to your child, then make sure to be there at any event, birthdays, Christmases, everything. Do whatever the steps that you have, but most importantly, if you can keep your child at home, keep your child at home.
Perfect. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, we have a petition that I will link in the description. It is so important to have as many people sign as possible. We are using this to fuel our legislative efforts. It is a no spam petition. They will not email you. You just need to put in your information so we can verify that you stand with us. But it's just all about oversight. That's the main thing. We understand that we can't shut down every single school out there or every single program, but there's no reason why they should not have a government agency or somebody coming in and monitoring to make sure that the safety of minors, of children, are being taken care of. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point. Anything else you'd like to add?
Nope, I agree with Jenna 100%. They have a right to run a business, and we have a right to protect our kids. And really, it's not my ultimate goal to shut down any organization. It's my goal to bring regulation, protect the kids. If it works for them, where they're not beating kids, then it works for them. And by all means, and it's important. And let me last thing, and then we'll wrap this up.
For sure, yeah.
Our survivor group, and I'm a guy. Most guys, survivors, and there's probably millions of us, don't talk about it. I encourage you guys to tell your story. Doesn't make you weak, makes you strong, and you're a voice for somebody else. So I know there's a lot of girls survivors that talk about it, and I commend them greatly. They have a lot of strength. It takes a lot of strength to sacrifice your privacy and that kind of stuff. So you got a story, man, and you went through some stuff. By you telling it, it changes some lives, and maybe, especially like media or politicians, get it out there, because it makes a difference. Sign the petition, and